Okay, today we're talking about APIs versus rolling your own pieces of infrastructure. What parts of your SaaS should you outsource and what parts should you build yourself? Now, with any system, there are going to be things that you should build yourself and things that you actually shouldn't. It's bad for the health of the business, it's bad for your sanity, it's bad for profitability, it's bad for when you eventually sell the business. Now, this goes back to one of the great economists of our time, Thomas Sowell, who famously said, "There are no solutions, only trade offs." And that is true. That is true in this case. There are things that if you outsource them, there are advantages to that and disadvantages. If you roll it yourself, there are advantages and disadvantages. You have to evaluate it in terms of trade off. There's no answer that's going to be correct in all aspects and give you every advantage and no downside. So you have to evaluate these things carefully. Now, in order to evaluate whether you should outsource something or build it in-house, I have 4 criteria that I usually go to. The 4 criteria are these. First, is it a part of our core competency? Is it something that's going to go in the sales and marketing material for our app? Are people going to buy our app because of this feature? If so, it is part of our core competency and we probably shouldn't outsource it. It's a big part of our value proposition. If someone else is really doing it for us and we're kind of just a middleman selling it, a thin API layer to someone else's system, that's not a great business. There's not a lot of moat around it. We can be cut off and our business can tank, or we can be in this position where most of our profit is going to them because they're actually doing the work and we're only taking a thin cut. It wouldn't take much for our customers to go to someone else who's also a wrapper for them, or just to go upstream directly to that provider. We want to build our own core competency, not outsource it. Second, how critical is this piece of the system to our overall running? Is it critical infrastructure? So is this something that if it had an outage for an hour, the business would grind to a halt until we fixed it? Or is it something that would be a slight annoyance for our customers, but they would get over it? Yeah, that's critical infrastructure. Third, what is the ongoing maintenance burden? If we build it ourselves, are we going to have people on staff constantly babysitting it, checking that it's all still running smoothly, answering help desk tickets? Is there going to be customer support that we have to do because we implemented it ourselves? All those kind of things come into play. What is the maintenance burden? And finally, how does the cost scale as we grow? Because there are some things that if we outsource them, maybe it's a flat rate. It costs us $10 a month to outsource it, and that's all we ever pay. It doesn't matter how much volume we do, it doesn't matter how many customers we have. It's just going to be a flat $10 a month. That's, really, really nice cost scaling. There's other things that if we outsource them, the cost that we pay to outsource it might scale linearly, so that we're paying per user that we onboard. As we make more profit, we pay them more. That's like, ideally we'd prefer it to be flat, obviously, but linear, we can kind of live with. Then again, there's other things where as we scale, we're going to have to use extra features and things, and it will actually start to churn upward. We'll start paying them more as we grow. Now, that might still be okay if we've grown big enough and if they're taking enough hassle off our plate. Maybe that cost scaling is still worth it, but it's definitely something we should keep an eye on. And it should factor into the decision whether we outsource. Because, of course, someone's going to come along and buy this business and they're going to say, "Hey, what are your ongoing costs?" And if you're saying, "Well, we're doing 50K a month in MRR, but we're spending 20K a month on this outsourced provider because we didn't really think through how much we were going to have to pay them as we had more and more users," yeah, that's a problem. That's going to dramatically cut your sale price on the business. So let's look at a few case study examples just to illustrate how these things apply. So first of all, an auth system. Should you outsource this? We're going to look at the criteria. So a popular outsourced auth system at the moment is Clerk. This is something I evaluated, took a look at. An alternative would be to use the Laravel built-in auth system. So Laravel has some pretty nice auth stuff built in. And so you need Clerk a lot less if you're using Laravel on the back end than if you're using some other back-end technology. So I was looking at Clerk because at one point I was trying to build the back end of a system with Node.js. It was a Next app, in fact. But as I looked at my options, part of what got me to switch over to Laravel was seeing that this is a system I wouldn't have to pay for, wouldn't have to outsource if I was on Laravel. Laravel had these features built in, where if I was building on Node, I would have to do a lot more of the work myself, which means more ongoing maintenance burden if there's bugs and issues and things I want to change. And so it made sense if I was going to have Node on the back end that I would outsource this to Clerk. But if I was on Laravel, I didn't really need to. That saved me some cost. It's not a core competency in either case. People don't buy my SaaS app because of its authentication system. That's just not what they care about. They're there to use a feature. They don't care. They just want to sign in and keep going. It's not a selling point. So in neither case is it outsourcing core competency. That's fine. Is it critical infrastructure? Yes. If people can't log into the system, they can't use the system, they stop paying. Yes, it's critical. So in the case of Clerk, we would be outsourcing critical infra. That's a point against Clerk. We don't want to do that. Another appeal to me of using the Laravel built-in system. Is there an ongoing maintenance burden? Now, here I need to make a careful distinction. There is some code to write with Laravel. If you can live with a very simple auth system, the built-in Laravel one is fine. All the starter kits have it already set up. You don't need to do anything. It's fine. If you want to have some more advanced features, if you want to do things like social and single sign-on, so you want people to be able to sign into your app using like their Google account or their LinkedIn account, that takes some setting up. There's libraries for it. There's something called Laravel Socialite that makes that pretty easy to implement, but it's not absolutely trivial. It does take some upfront work to do that with the Laravel built-in system. But that work is upfront work. You spend a few days on it, get it working and solid and stable, and then you pretty much don't have to worry about it again. It stays in place. There's a key, an API key configured in your end file. That's it. Same thing with Clerk. Low ongoing maintenance because it's someone else's problem, but the ongoing maintenance with Laravel is low. There's an upfront time spent to build the system. Not that long, few days, but it's not zero like it basically is with Clerk. You don't just plug and play. But once it's set up, it's stable. Your auth system isn't going to change a whole lot. People log in, they do password resets. You're not going to be adding features to it. Although the thing is, if your app is the kind of thing where you may have to do something exotic with your auth system at some point, then you definitely want it to be built into your system so you have that flexibility. Final thing, how does the cost scale? If it's built in auth built into the system like it is with Laravel, the cost scaling is near zero. You basically don't have to do any extra payments to be able to onboard more users. They all use the same system. The cost of supporting them is just the cost of maybe they call you and say, hey, I did a password reset, but the email didn't come through, and you say, check your spam folder. That's all. With Clerk, the cost scaling is very dependent on use case. So if you're doing a low-end B2C app, you might only have to pay $20 a month on the low end. On the other hand, if you're doing something a bit bigger and more enterprisey, when you get 1,000 companies using your system, and each of those has 100 employees at them, so there's 100,000 people logging into your system at some point. Maybe they're not heavy users, but at some point in any given month, they each log in. You might be paying multiple thousands of dollars a month. I did a quick estimate on that setup, and you could be paying $2,200 a month. Now, if you have 1,000 enterprise customers, $2,200 a month may not be that big a deal. 1,000 enterprise customers, depending what you're charging for your software, if you're charging them $100 a month to be on the software, you have 100,000 a month coming in, 2,200, 2.2%, not the end of the world. It's a slice, it's a noticeable slice, but it's not totally ridiculous. You may still choose to make that trade-off, especially if you're using a backend system that doesn't have auth built in. But it's something to be cognizant of. It's not free to scale. If you want some of those enterprise features and you have a lot of users, you will have to pay for them if you go with something like Clerk. Now, for all of that, I think in most cases, I'd prefer to have auth built in, mainly because of that outsourcing critical infrastructure level. What if, for some reason, someone does something dumb at Clerk, they go out of business, or they get sued, or someone just decides they don't like you one day, they can cut you off, and then your auth system is broken. That's the kind of thing I prefer to have control over, especially when the ongoing maintenance burden is low. I'd prefer to do the upfront work for 3 days and then be able to sleep at night knowing that my auth system is not going to be cut off or broken because of something out of my control. So that's my general instinct on auth systems, but of course, case by case. All right, next one. Let's look at a payment system. So you could use Stripe or Square or whatever else you want to use. Or you could roll your own payment system for interacting directly with banks and tokenizing credit cards and processing direct debits and all that sort of thing. So the question is, are you outsourcing a core competency if you outsource to something like Stripe? And I think the answer is no. Basically, no one thinks that your payment system is the core reason to buy your product. Unless your product actually is like a payment processor, then you're not outsourcing a core competency if you use Stripe for payments. But if you roll your own, yes, you have a bit more control, but the ongoing maintenance burden is very high, very, very high. There's so much cruft in the legacy banking system. For me, I kind of started out my journey in understanding finance. I started out in crypto world. Just Bitcoin and crypto was a new thing when I was first starting to wonder about this stuff, and I started looking at that. Once you've seen how simple that system is and you try to understand the legacy banking system, it just looks terrible. It looks like, how did anyone even come up with this? So banking infrastructure is a pain to deal with. And so you've always got to be worrying about, are there going to be chargebacks and reversals? And what if there's some problem with the banking API because they have outages? All of that is just such a giant pain that my advice to basically everybody is outsource the payment system. Stripe's a great option. I also like Square. But outsource it unless you have some incredibly good reason not to. You probably want to outsource payments because that ongoing maintenance burden is so high if you roll your own. Yes, it's critical infrastructure. Yes, if the payment provider cuts you off, you are in a world of hurt. So what we've said there is outsourcing critical infrastructure, yes, but in a case where you do want to outsource something that's critical because of other factors, you definitely want multiple providers. You should have your system, your SaaS, set up in a way that you can take payments through multiple third-party outsource providers. You want to have people able to pay you through Stripe and able to pay you through Square and able to pay you through PayPal or something like that. You want to have multiple providers. So if one of them just wakes up and decides one day they hate you, you have a fallback option. You can change one setting in your environment file and bam, you are taking payments from someone else. That's the safety net you want to have when you do have to outsource something that is critical to the health of the business. And so final question with the payment system, how does the cost scale? With something like Stripe, it's linear. They take a percentage of all your payments. Not ideal, but they are taking a huge burden off your shoulders, so I can live with it. On the other hand, if you roll your own, scaling is very erratic because of that maintenance burden. The cost of maintaining the payment system will be low, 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 low. And then suddenly you reach the point where you've got so many customers, you can't just do it yourself. You can't just have the employees you have dealing with it. You actually have to hire another person to handle the overhead of maintaining the system. So the cost stays low and then suddenly, jumps by whatever, $80,000 a year because you had to hire someone to sit at a desk and answer phones and deal with the customers. So the jumps in cost are erratic if you roll your own. Another reason that it's good to outsource it because that gives you predictability. So that's payment system. I would almost always outsource it. Finally, email system. Are you outsourcing a core competency? Generally, no, you're not. If you go with a provider like Postmark, who I like, or again, there's Mailgun, SES, there's alternatives. If you go with an outside provider for sending email, you're probably not outsourcing a core competency. We'll come back to that. You might be if you're an email provider. You could self-host a mail server. You could spin up a Linux server with an MTA on it and use that to send email directly. But the problem with that, as much as it's nice to have control over your own infrastructure, the problem is that, again, the ongoing maintenance burden is very high. It's difficult to set up your own mail server in a way that when you send through it, the emails don't end up in the spam folder. It takes a lot of effort to get to the point where global ISPs and servers trust emails from you and will drop it in the inbox instead of the spam folder. And if you get put on some spam blacklist because of something potentially beyond your control, one of your users sent dodgy emails and now your whole domain has been added to a spam list, getting off that spam list is, again, a giant pain. So again, for most people, the right decision is to outsource the email system. You don't want to worry about setting up servers to send email. Let someone else worry about that. The exception would be if your app is an email provider. If you are just giving someone basically a nicer API to using Amazon SES, then that's a bad idea. That's not a great sustainable business. I thought seriously about this at one point because it's so much cheaper to send through SES than it is through some other providers like Postmark. I thought, I'll make profit off being a wrapper around Amazon SES. Turned out that wasn't a great idea, reasons I won't go into now. But the point is, if you are going to send email, if people are going to buy your app because they want to use it to send emails, your app should be doing the sending of the emails so that you have control over that, so that you can't be cut off by this one critical provider who you depend on. I guess the big thing was when I was going to be a wrap around SES, I realized that if SES cuts me off, I don't have a business. If I have to roll over to any other provider, suddenly my profit margin is gone. SES was cheaper, but if I had to move over to someone else, no margin there. My business has to be something other than just being a wrapper around SES. And again, how does the cost scale? It's linear with growth, like with payments. The more emails you send, the more you pay. On the other hand, if you self-host an email server, it's erratic because at first it seems almost free, and then suddenly you have to hire more people to maintain the system, and it jumps. So again, for the most part, I would outsource an email system unless it is part of your core competency. All right, those are some case studies. We'll boil it down to some rules of thumb. If you're looking at something right now that's outside some of these common use cases, trying to decide whether you should implement it yourself or use some outside provider, here are the things to consider. One, if it's your core competency, basically never outsource it because you're losing the moat around your business and your business could be killed overnight by people other than you. If it's your core competency, don't outsource it. Two, if the ongoing maintenance is high, try to outsource it. Try hard to find someone who specializes in just that thing who will take it off your plate because the ongoing maintenance burden will be a drag on your business. Three, if it's critical infrastructure, have backup providers. You might still outsource it if it's a high maintenance burden, so things like payments, things like email. But if you do outsource it, have multiple providers so that if you get cut off from one through no fault of your own, you can quickly roll over to an alternative and your business doesn't grind to a halt. And finally, map out cost scenarios carefully. So this was the thing with Clerk. Because the costs are so different depending on your use case, you need to bust out the spreadsheet. You need to map out, okay, if we get this many customers and if they use our system this way, what will it cost us? Versus if we get more customers, but they're low usage, will it cost us less? You need to game out multiple scenarios and just prove to yourself that whatever your customers want to do with your system, it'll be okay. They're not going to start using your system in a way that makes them not profitable enough. Now, that may mean that you need to change your pricing, that you need to build in your tiers of how much usage they're doing of this subsystem into your pricing. But you just need to be aware of the issues there around cost scaling. None of them are deal breakers, but you do need to make sure that you're charging in a way that when the users use this subsystem that you're outsourcing, they don't drive up your costs without also driving up your revenue. Okay, so those are the rules of thumb. Think carefully through outsourcing. It's something that has the ability to make or break your business. If you want to ask me questions in the comments, if you want to reach out and ask about a system that you're thinking about doing outsourcing on but not sure whether to do it, I'd love to talk to you about it. Hit me up or reach out in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.